I've actually got 3 packages, but not a whole lot of notes on the third one, which is sort of a kind of a Dave Verver pick anyway.
I've got a Dave Verwer pick as well.
There we go.
In fact, I've potentially got 2 Dave picks, which are, if you're listening and I don't know what a Dave pick is, it's an interesting package that comes with some caveats normally,
and is not recommended, actually.
I don't know whether it's about whether it's not recommended or not. It's just there are subtleties to my talking about it. It's not just this is amazing, you should use this.
Well, let me clarify. It's mentioned, and the first thing you say is you shouldn't be using, or you won't be using it.
I do have one of those today.
There we go. Excellent.
I do have one of those today.
Welcome to the Swift Package Index.
Well, it's rarely. This is the thing with picking dependencies, right? It's rarely a straightforward decision, and that's why you need so much information that we provide with the index.
Right. The not picking of dependencies is also a skill that needs to be honed.
Exactly.
And we're here to help.
Well, maybe we're here at least.
We are here. There is an interesting post on the Swift forums. Not sure if you've seen it. It's by Doug Greger. A new sample. What's the post title? New sample tiny swing program mixing Java and Swift. Did you see that one?
So this is a bit of inside baseball here. I only saw it because you sent me the link to it.
All right. Well, that qualifies it. It means you read my stuff.
Yeah.
I was really curious about that one, and obviously we talked about the announcement in last episode about the Swift Java interop, which was announced at the server-side Swift conference in end of September. Really great announcement. Really exciting to see that development. And Doug has taken what I believe is pretty much one of the classic or canonical examples about Java development, like the UI development. It's like a little Celsius to Fahrenheit converter.
Right.
Just 2 text fields and a button to convert between the 2.
A problem that we can only solve. There's no way we could solve that problem.
Well, the proper way of solving that problem would actually to just everyone be using Celsius, obviously.
I'm sure we also need some kind of microservices architecture in there somewhere.
And that could be Kubernetes deployed. I mean, certainly that would be the appropriate way to do it. But in the absence of all of that, you'd obviously write a Swing Java application for it, install Java, which is actually the biggest hurdle in getting this running. The props to Doug, the example worked flawlessly, but installing Java, which I haven't done in like more than 10 years, well over 10 years. And thankfully, it's actually quite easy. Brew, you can install it with Brew. You still have to do some fiddling with the setting up the Java home, like telling the OS where your JDK lives.
Yeah,
that sort of stuff. I was glad I still had some memory of how that works. It works quite well. And then you effectively just run Swift build, and then you have a command to bring up the thing. But what Doug has done is he's sort of started out with the original Java example and then replaced parts of it with Swift, and just initially the computation of to converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit, which is then handled by a Swift function, but also then the instantiation of the UI components actually invoked from Swift. Obviously calling up the Swing objects, but they're actually created in Swift, and then the setup and done is there. It's interesting. It's like it demonstrates a lot, even though it's such a small example. You have a proper easy function call. I mean, that's the first thing you want to try and see, but it's also the easiest thing, right? Calling a thing that converts one double into another is something that is not as mind-bending as thinking about UI components being instantiated across a bridge like that and then handed back and forth. And that's really nice to see. it also gave me a bit of a flashback, because I remembered that the very first application I wrote for macOS in 2001 was actually Java. So I'm sure you recall. Actually, no, you started using the Mac later, so you might not recall this. When the first macOS versions came out after the next acquisition, it came with Cocoa, which was, still the Cocoa that we know today, but it came with your Objective-C sort of backend, but also it came with a Java backend. So you could write a Java app that called into the Cocoa UI libraries. And that's what I did, because I knew some Java, Objective-C I'd never heard of before, and there were examples. They had like exactly like currently, or for a while when Swift came out, you had the dual facing, you had Swift and Objective-C examples when you wrote an iOS or a macOS app. At the time, you had Objective-C and Java.
Right.
And that's what I did.
That's a little bit before my time on the Mac side, but the only thing I do remember of that is that what was the web frameworks? WebObjects came with Java examples for a long time still after they dropped them from the Cocoa side.
Yeah, there was for quite a while. I think there was sort of I'm not sure how clear it was to everyone involved which one would win out. I remember at the time also Java was just the thing. It's like these days you have to have AI. At the time you sort of had to have Java in your in your stack somewhere. You needed to be talking about Java, and it was very much the thing that people thought would solve all the different UI paradigms across different platforms and stuff. So it was quite interesting. I didn't keep it around for long because it was very clear. I can't point to exact examples of what tipped me off, but when you looked at it, you knew, no, this is the one you actually should be using. The other one is there were these little signs along the sides. You see, you can see it kind of works, but it's probably not the one that's going to stick around. Pretty much, like, also after a while it was clear that with Swift, newer stuff would be Swift only, and Objective-C is kind of on the way out. But it was really interesting to see Java come up again in this context and being used in a UI application. So really nice example there. We'll add links to the show notes.
Yeah, Java was a language that passed me by, really. My university degree was it was before Java's time. We learnt C++ and C in my university degree. And then when Java was kind of taking off, I was doing Delphi and Object Pascal, and then from there into the web, basically. So Java kind of passed me by. So it's not something I ever really got any real experience with. I think I wrote a little applet once for some website that we did one time, but that was about it.
Yeah, no, I only encountered it in a project later on as well. It's my university stuff was also C and Pascal. Yeah, it was Pascal. I'm not sure we used Delphi, but something that used Pascal and compiled Pascal.
Some kind of Pascal, thing,
very popular back then. God, we're dating ourselves again. Let's move on.
We are, yes. It is the old person Swift podcast again. Yeah. Talking of Swift, I did a little survey in iOS Dev Weekly last week, which was kind of interesting, and the survey was both about Swift and also kind of Apple platform development. And I wrote about the results of it in last Friday's email, so there's a kind of detailed look at it there. But I thought it was just worth mentioning here as well that both Swift and Apple platform development I asked her two questions at the beginning, which is how do you feel about Swift and how do you feel about Object Pascal, not Object Pascal. How do you feel about Apple platform development? And there was a scale of kind of pessimistic to optimistic from 1 to 5. And both answers got well above average. Apple platform development got a 4 out of 5, and Swift got a 3.5 out of 5, which is, it's a positive. It's a positive number. But what I noticed is because people were also then asked later in the survey to leave comments about what they thought about these two technologies, and what was quite interesting was obviously the people who felt pessimistic. One of the things that they brought up was Swift concurrency and language complexity in general. But actually, what was kind of interesting was that also in the people who felt optimistic about the language, those same themes came through regularly, and it was the main feedback about the language, both from people who felt pessimistic and optimistic.
Interesting, yeah. By the way, I really liked what you did in iOS Dev Weekly last week, that you had the intro and then expanded on it later on.
Yeah, I got some good feedback about that. People liked it, although at the same time, I did get a higher than normal number of unsubscribes, so it's mixed.
Oh, that's a shame.
The people who took time to write liked it, and the people who didn't just unsubscribed.
Well, just these people liked it harder than the others did.
Exactly.
That's the way to look at it. Yeah, it's a theme, and I wonder how much of it is sort of self-fulfilling. I've mentioned this before, and I'll happily say it again. I think a lot of this discussion around Swift getting more complex is just people having to face the inherent complexity there is. People complain about C++ being complex and other languages being complex, and there is just something that we're dealing with as we write software for now systems that have 10 cores. I mean, it's not rare. I mean, that's like common to have 6, 7, 8 cores. So you are dealing with multi-processor systems, and accordingly are sort of herded down the path of dealing with that. I mean, when we're going back in that territory again. When I started programming, I actually managed to talk our professor at the time into buying us a dual core Pentium at the time. Like, you actually had 2 processors. There were like 2 separate cards on the thing, and that was rare. So in lots of ways, there was no complexity of that sort to deal with. Yes, of course, the systems were multitasking and they did stuff, and you sort of all the underpinnings were already there. But I think these days you're leaving much more on the table if you ignore that and don't deal with it at all. But that complexity is there. You need to synchronize somehow when you deal with data, right? It's just because Swift 5 doesn't deal with the warnings effectively that Swift 6 flushes out doesn't mean the problems aren't there. It's just you see them maybe rarely because you don't look at crash reports, or you don't make the connection necessarily. You think it's someone else's bug, but stuff is there, and some part of the system has to deal with it, and you are part of that system having to deal with it. So in a sense, it's like complaining about the weather. I mean, it's you got to get a bit thicker coat. It's just no way around it.
Yeah, I think one thing that's that I when I was writing about it on Friday, the one thing I added to it is obviously that we've said many times now is that you don't need to opt into Swift 6 language mode immediately. But I think there is also a downside to that, which is that people don't like feeling like they're being left behind. And maybe this is clear, but I'm not sure it's clear to me. Certainly, I can't think whether it's been said off the top of my head. Is there any estimation of how long these language modes will stick around? I mean, is staying on an old language mode indefinitely? Is that? I don't think that's a possibility, but I don't think it's clear when you'll be kind of moved towards making that decision, whether you like it or not.
Honestly, looking at lots of packages, I get the feeling like the packages themselves are going to age out before Swift 5 mode
Sure. Yeah.
disappears. I mean, like Swift 4 mode is around, and no one is writing packages in, that require Swift 4 anymore. And
Of
there were
course.
also big steps in the past that sort of, were hurdles. And I don't think that's a concern. I mean, I'm not in the sense, I understand that people have that worry, but I think it really bears repeating. That's not the thing you need to worry about. I think that the thing people need to worry about is whether the cost of not using what Swift 6 mode offers is a loss, right? Are you not leaving something on the table by not using these tools to make it easier and or safer? I mean, easier is sort of, it's only going to be easier in hindsight. Once you've paid sort of the price of learning how to actually use it, then that that the balance shifts a bit. Actually, something I want to bring up in that sense, because you see there's a lot of in social media, and it seems like it's often people well regarded in the community that spearhead these discussions about Swift complexity and stuff. And there's a really interesting observation I made. A while back, there was a well-known podcaster and Swift author. I don't want to name him, although it's probably going to be obvious who it is, because I don't want to throw shade, but he was very reluctant to move to Swift. He complained about it. It's super complex and hard, and it was very clear that the problem of switching wasn't the language, but his discomfort of trying the new thing and feeling like stepping back. And it's very easy to feel that way, right? There's something you're really familiar with, you know exactly how to do, and you're asked to forget that, or sort of not use it and use something else instead and relearn your skills. And then at some point he realized, well, I'm going to have to move, because I can't keep using Objective-C anymore. There are APIs coming out that aren't Objective-C native, and while it still might be possible to use them, I'm very clearly going down the wrong path. So he started writing parts of his app in Swift, and lo and behold, week by week, it seemed to be getting easier. And after a while, he spoke quite favorably about Swift, and he made that transition. He made that change. He retrained in Swift, and I would actually he's come on board. He actually posts stuff where he says, "This is really nice. Look how Swift is succeeding here."
Sure,
of course. Yeah. I think if you presented him today with a choice, which one do you like better? Which one do you think is easier? Which one is better at dealing with the complexity of your software? I'm pretty confident he'd say it's Swift, but it's really hard to see that before the transition. This is only something you see after you've paid that price of that ramping up cost into the new system. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's largely a communication problem and education problem for all of us to take the plunge. And also, I think on the tooling side, we know this, right? There are rough edges still around how warnings are presented, how many there are. Some of them can actually go away because the compiler can be smarter. And I think because of that, it's really important to stress that the switch to Swift 6 mode is not something you need to do immediately. You actually are on the leading edge of the adoption curve if you're doing it now.
Oh, completely.
Give yourself the time, because stuff will improve all on its own without you doing anything. And if you do this in a year's time, you'll have a better time. By all means, if you feel like this is interesting and something you want to do now, do it, because you will benefit already. I mean, we have benefited in our project from doing it. But there's no FOMO here. You're not losing out on anything by waiting. In fact, you're gaining, just letting other people do the adoption is helping you indirectly. And I think that's the part that is missing a bit. And I suspect a lot of that negativity around Swift and concurrency is a bit of fear. There's a big change coming. I don't really know completely what it's about. I see these people who are really, advanced, struggling with it. How would I have a chance? I mean, I have those same thoughts. Like, I I look at Matt Masicotti, who we'll probably be talking about in a minute, again, making changes and struggling with some of that stuff and posting stuff. And I read his posts, I think, Jesus Christ, I would never have figured this out. But the good thing is I don't have to, right? I can just give myself the time and wait. There's no one sitting there and asking me to make this change tomorrow. Right?
I think everything you've said there is good, but also in some way doesn't matter, because the perception is the reality. I mean, people, there is a definite feeling of this, and it's not something that should be. I don't think any changes are needed or anything like that, but it's certainly something that we should be aware of, because this kind of thing can become how people externally see the language as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why I'm saying I think it's like communication-wise, it's really important to try and, maybe not counter is like it sounds more like an argument, but maybe stress that the time critical part isn't as time critical as you think it is, and to more pitch, this is not a chore. This is actually you're opting into a mechanism that helps you. And I often miss that from the discussion. The upsides of making this change aren't what's typically presented.
I would push back a little bit there. I think it's clear that there are advantages to adopting data race safety in Swift 6 language mode, but they are not super obvious changes in all cases. In fact, in most cases, they're not super obvious changes. And this is not a problem that the language was really struggling with any more than any other language struggles with this. And yes, it's better, but it wasn't. This was not something that people were going, oh, I wish that somebody would solve data race safety. And I think that's where some of it comes from.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But I think that's also because we don't immediately associate issues with the source there, because it's so disconnected, right? This is like someone pushing a change on Wednesday and 2 weeks later it crashes in production. You don't make that immediate connection, and these crashes we're often seeing. That it's really hard to trace that back.
It often
right?
is, exactly, yeah. But if you think, that's in a highly concurrent Swift on the server application. If you think about your average iOS application, this was not the big problem.
Well, I guess, but I mean, it's also not something that's even harder to see there, because it's not your device that's going to crash, right?
Sure. Anyway, good to hear what people are thinking about it, and as you say, going forward, it's only going to get better from here. You don't have to do it immediately. But I thought it was interesting to bring those results to the podcast too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's also important not to just gloss over it, right? Because if people voice that concern, it's a concern that needs to be heard and discussed and
sure, of course,
possibly drive a bit of change around tooling and communication to make it clearer what the stakes are.
Shall we do some package recommendations?
Yeah, let's do some packages.
Okay, I will start us this week, and I'll start us with a package called Swift Claude, which is predictably an API wrapper around Anthropic's Claude API, which is one of these LLM providers. They are kind of on par with ChatGPT and OpenAI as the kind of market leader. And this is a predictable wrapper around that API, but there was something in it that struck me that I hadn't seen before and I thought was worth a mention. And it was that you can, apparently in the Claude API, you can supply functions in your code and let the AI decide when to call them. Which is something I hadn't come across before. And you can do this via the API. So you can define an API within your Swift code, and using a property wrapper, you can mark that as something that the API should be aware of, and it will communicate the details of that API up to Claude, and then Claude will decide, depending on what it's doing with your prompt, will decide when to call that function and what parameters to call it with. So you can kind of have the LLM decide to call back to code in your application, which I thought was very interesting, and a great implementation through property wrappers here into Swift is really a very trivial mechanism to transmit the details of your API up into the Claude API.
Interesting. Is there like an example given how you would use that?
There is, but it's a very abstract example and not actually that useful, unless it's referring to something that I don't know about. So the example that's in the README file is there's a struct called turbo encabulator, which I don't know what an encabulator is. And it says it turbo encabulates its input, and the parameter is a number of Marsal vein count, which I also don't know what those are. I think they're made up. I think it's a completely
fake API,
abstract.
isn't it?
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's just completely abstract, but it's so obscure that it made me think, I wonder if this is a thing that I just don't know about. And then in the conversation, the prompt says, I'm creating a demo showcasing your ability to use tools. Can you invoke the turbo encabulator tool with some made-up input? So I have a feeling it is purely just an abstract example.
Right, yeah. Okay, interesting.
And of course, it also supports all the other things that all of these APIs support. So it supports full text responses. It supports streamed text responses, so you can show the output as you receive it from the API. It has image, UI image and NS image compatibility, so you can include images with your prompts. And all the other things that these API wrappers all do, but I thought the tool use was worth a mention.
Nice, yeah, interesting that these I guess all the LLMs and their providers are covered by Swift packages now, aren't they? I've seen quite a number of them.
Pretty much, yeah. There's certainly ones for all of the major kind of commercial ones, and then there's also ones for things like Llama and a lot of the other ones as well that are kind of, some of them are non-commercial too.
Okay, my first pick is called...
Oh, and I didn't say who that was from. It was from George Leon.
Nice. Okay, my first pick is called JSON Patch by Peter Ringset. And this is an interesting package dealing with JSON patch objects. Have you heard of JSON patch objects before? I hadn't.
I have.
You have? Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
I've not used them, but I have heard of them.
Interesting. Yeah. So this was new to me. So this is actually an RFC, and it's an RFC to like a spec to modify JSON objects. And effectively, it's like little a specification for little JSON snippets that define operations on a JSON object, like add, remove and replace operations on properties. Like you could add a new property, remove one, or replace one, or replace the value and stuff like that. Think of as a diff mechanism on a JSON object. And this is like a Swift package that deals with that, so you can specify these operations in Swift and then generate these patch objects and also apply these patch objects to an existing JSON object that you have in your data and stuff like that. So really interesting, and I think this is also interesting in combination with HTTP patch requests, where you would not send a whole object again, but have a patch operation on an existing object, and then you can streamline your APIs to be passing around these rather than having big objects passed around when they change and stuff like that. So yeah, quite interesting. That's JSON Patch by Peter Ringset.
Very cool. My next package is called Singapore Kit by Jia Chen, and this is a package that is very specific. It is a package that makes it easy to use Singapore government data within your SwiftUI projects, and again comes with a property wrapper, and that's the reason that I'm highlighting it. Really, is this property wrapper effectively gives you a Singapore property wrapper that you can pop before any variable. And if you pass a key path into that property wrapper of one of the bits of data you would like, for example, like relative humidity or air temperature or rainfall or air quality or UV index or a whole load of other bits of data, and then declare a variable after that property wrapper, it's going to automatically pull that data in and assign it into that variable for you. And it reminded me of something that we're just switching across to in the Swift Package Index now. It reminded me of the dependencies package and property wrapper from Point Freako, which I think works in I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but in to the end user, it works in a similar way, is that you kind of say, this is a piece of data that I would like to bring in as a dependency to this type that I'm working with right now. And that is literally all you have to do, and it's a very powerful way of working with something like this. Now, I'm not sure what's happening behind the scenes, whether there are network requests being made, and that is the disadvantage of something like this, is that it is completely opaque how it's actually working. Is there any caching happening here, or is this setting off network requests, which I presume it is? But I do like the syntax of this, and I think it's something that I'm seeing more and more often at the moment.
Interesting. I wonder if that would work, because a property wrapper can't be async, can it? So I'm curious how that would work.
I don't think it can. But I'm looking down further in the README now, and I am finding that the relative humidity, for example, this is just an example that's in the README file, comes back as a enum, which can be loading, failure, or success. So it clearly is async because there is a loading state.
Right. Okay.
And you are tasked with dealing with that loading state in your in your code.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I guess that's kind of similar, because the dependency system you mentioned is also very similar to the environment system in Swift UI. So I'm guessing that's,
of course,
just to give people an impression, that's what the API looks like effectively, doesn't it?
Yeah, I should have thought of environment. I think it's just because we've been working with dependencies recently. Yeah, exactly. It was the thing that came to mind.
Nice.
But I like it, and I like that that something. I guess this is a very specific use. The Singapore kit is you're going to need that if you're writing an app that deals with Singapore data. But I do like the technique.
Well, it might be interesting if you're building something similar for a different data domain, or a different domain in general.
Sure.
That pattern
Take a look at
might
it.
be interesting to inspect how it's done there.
100%. Yeah.
My second pick is called Swift Glob, and it's by Tourist, but forked from the similar project by the same name by David Beck. And Tourist have taken this over. I think the other project has sort of not been maintained anymore. And it does what it says on the tin. So this gives you a glob API for file name lookup. And by glob, I mean like the star thing, like you do a star.swift to match on all the Swift files in a directory. It also supports the double star / syntax. So you have all the subdirectories, and then it searches through those. It's I think it follows I think there's a standard around globbing, how the syntax works, and it's allegedly
right, yes,
compatible with that general standard. But this is like a really nice API, because to my knowledge there is nothing like it currently in Foundation. So you'd have to do your own, get all the entries and then filter on them. And this just deals with that, and you can write really expressive file filters in your application if you need that sort of thing. Yeah, nice API, very focused and easy to use.
Great. Now it's time for my Dave recommendation. My final package this week is called Gesture Button by Daniel Seide. And It's a SwiftUI button that, as the README says, the gesture button is a SwiftUI button that can handle many different gestures. So it is just a button, but you can also add functionality on is pressed, press action, release inside action, release outside action, long press action, double tap action, repeat action, blah, 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 blah. Lots of these, even dragging and dropping and things like that. And it is an encapsulation, I think, of all of the different things that were possible with the old UI button that maybe all of them haven't come across to SwiftUI yet. So if you want to do something slightly non-standard with a button, then this is the kind of package that is going to help you do that. My caveat to this is don't do weird things with buttons. And the reason I'm talking about it, because obviously if I just believe that you just shouldn't ever do weird things with buttons, then I just wouldn't talk about this package, right? But it is worth talking about because there are situations in apps all the time where you do just want to do something extra, a little bit extra with a button. Maybe it does drag off the screen. Maybe it does have a long press or something like that in addition to the short press or something like that. Yeah. I can't think of any specific examples right now. And this kind of package is going to be better in those situations than rolling your own stuff at that point. But resist the temptation to go crazy with buttons because it is a common user interface gotcha to have buttons that don't behave like buttons and people expect to be able to just tap on a button and have it do a thing. Playing with that expectation is very risky in terms of whether people will be able to use your application. So I do like the package, but I also think you should be very cautious with your use of it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. All right. Well, my third pick is a Dave pick as well. And it's a package called StarCraft Kit by Marcus Ziadeh. And this is super niche. You really are unlikely to ever use this, but I just saw the description. It says StarCraft Kit aims to be the go-to Swift package for developers working with the StarCraft 2 Pro scene. And I thought, well, it succeeded in that mission because I think it is the go-to Swift package for that purpose. Because
sure, yes, it is number one in that list. Yeah,
but I also thought it's great that there are these packages being now served in the Swift ecosystem. Like, is this like super niche? I think. I mean, I know StarCraft is still big, given that it's God, how old is that game? That's like 20, 30 years? How old? Well, yeah, it must be 30 even.
No, I mean, StarCraft, the original StarCraft is that old, but I presume
StarCraft 2 is not quite as old. Yeah. Well, StarCraft 2 is also old. Like StarCraft 2 is
certainly
more than
10 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. But I know that there's a tournament scene around that, and but still to see a package like that pop up is quite nice. I think it's really great to see that even these niches are now being served in the Swift ecosystem. That's why I thought I'd highlight it. It has a text user interface, so you can. I think there's a tournament site and data that you can crawl through and inspect and stuff and list and all sorts of. Just have a look at it if you're interested in StarCraft and see what's going on there.
I did have a look at this, and in fact, it was on my short list of packages to talk about this week, but it didn't make the final three for me. But yes, I thought it was great to see this. I think it uses there's an API that it uses called Panda Score or something like that. I was reading the README, and so there's a web API behind the scenes where it's getting all this stuff from. But you're right that this is the premier StarCraft stats package for Swift.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's great to see. It's great to see all sorts of packages. You're right that I do like to bring the occasional obscure one that you might never use. Like, I've done many retro computing ones in the past, and is StarCraft 2 retro yet? I don't know what when does it become retro?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm just checking the original StarCraft came out in '98. StarCraft 2, expansion came out in 2010, so it must be. Oh no, 2010. So yeah, it's not the 20 years that I gave
Right,
it.
so 14 years.
Yeah, but still, it's
yeah, old enough though.
yeah.
Right, let's wrap it up there, and we will be back in a few weeks with more news from the package index and package recommendations or not recommendations, as the case may be. But until then, we will say goodbye for now.
See you next time. Bye bye.
All right, bye-bye.